So thanks for inviting me. Just to introduce myself, I'm a social scientist, and my focus is on how societies, which are living social systems, change and either at different critical points either evolve or collapse. And so right now I'm actually working on a paper on the emerging design of a sustainable future. So that's really kind of like the focus of my work. However, right now we've got this problem with climate change, which is the bullet of the atomic scientists say there's many existential issues facing humanity right now, but the two pressing ones are nuclear war and climate change. And assuming that Putin doesn't go absolutely nuts when Russia collapses and blows us all up, the issue that we have to deal with right now is we have this pressing issue of making sure that we don't wind up with runaway catastrophic climate change. So because that's a pressing issue, I wound up spending the last few years putting a lot of my time into looking at this issue. And right now, it seems to me that a major problem that we're facing is that there are these myths out there, these fallacies and myths that most people have wound up accepting about what's happening with climate mitigation, and that's what's really blocking action, the effective action on climate mitigation, including, of course, most geoengineering, and particularly solar radiation mitigation. So anyway, I'll just try to quickly go through some of these points. And I'm very happy that Peter Wadhams has agreed to become the lead author on a paper that I'm writing with him on this issue. So I think most scientists and most environmentalists are well-meaning people, but I think that they are operating on a lot of false assumptions, and which are distorting their risk assessments, and which in particular have the effect of discounting the need for questioning the current approach that's the IPCC assumptions approach and the Paris agreements. So the last AR6 report agrees that the Paris Agreement targets are going to get missed. And however, there's a problem that there's the assumption that even if they are missed, the overshoot will be acceptable, and after a couple of decades of overshoot, it'll be possible to, or at least by 2100, it'll be possible to get back below what is considered to be safe levels, which are also not safe levels. But anyway, the problem, of course, is that the overshoot risks that we're facing right now are unacceptable for two main reasons. One is the fact that we are already losing species, and we're going to have it's going to really accelerate the mass extinction event that we are already entered into. And the second reason, of course, is that we are already beginning to pass climate tipping points, which could have many of which could be irreversible, like the loss of the cryosphere, and they can also have catastrophic consequences in that they can just create positive feedbacks that will be extremely difficult, if impossible, to control. So what we have right now is we're on a trajectory towards catastrophic outcomes. But even if all the national mitigation plans are implemented, which is highly unlikely, we will still wind up passing a 2-degree level probably around mid-century. And the issue what isn't being taken into account is the risks of this, because we are already in dangerous climate change, as evidenced, for example, by the loss of coral reefs, the drying out of the rainforests, increasing desertification, the loss of glaciers, melting of the Arctic ice, etc. But the issue that's really not taken into is the fact that we are passing as the positive feedbacks and the tipping points, the fact that we've now engaged, got these feedback processes going on, which are going to accelerate, which are going to increase temperatures and accelerate the process of climate change. And that's really, so the only thing that, the other thing that's not really taken into account is the committed warming. The fact that even if you stopped all emissions tomorrow, we're still going to go up over 2 degrees because of the warming that's already in the system. So this means that the only possible way of avoiding dangerous and catastrophic increases in temperature is that we have to engage in large-scale CDR and SRM interventions. But the risks of those aren't fully understood, and how we're going to do that isn't understood, and that's why we urgently need research. So the problem is, the scientific problems here are that there's a poor understanding of the real risks of climate overshoot, and there isn't an understanding of how we will manage, how we can manage it. And part of the problem is that the IPCC reports are arrived at by consensus, and governments not only get to pick who the scientists are that participate in this, but they also get to veto and change contact. It isn't just a purely scientific process. And the result is that many key issues are taken off the table. For example, right up until the last report, it was forbidden to even mention the word fossil fuels, right? It's kind of like in China, you're not allowed to talk about democracy. And so you've got a lot of the key issues that are discussed. For example, how the fossil fuel interests in countries are actively working to block mitigation efforts, or the fact that we need to have systemic change, including things like shifting away from meat-based diets. There are powerful interests opposed to this, and they won't allow these discussions to be raised in international forums. Also, of course, scientific assessments tend to be conservative for many reasons, including the lags in assessing findings, the time that it takes to have a discussion and develop consensus, and the fact that scientists, like everyone else, are very reluctant to accept that we could be on a catastrophic course. And also they are very reluctant to step out of line and to start making unpopular statements. So nobody wants to go first in sticking their neck out on saying that being the Chicken Little, saying the sky is falling. So it's for many reasons there's a conservatism that's really built into all the assessments. And by the way, it's not just the assessments of the pace and the dangers of climate change. There's also been a tremendous underassessment of the pace, for example, of breakthrough technologies, so that consistently the pace of the introduction of renewable energies, it's been underestimated by everybody, including its most ardent supporters. So we see this taking place at both ends. So one of the main problems with the Paris Agreement is that it focuses on these sort of relatively arbitrary, well, they're not totally arbitrary, but these maximum acceptable temperatures, rather than focusing on Earth energy imbalance. So the whole question of greenhouse gases and their long-term impacts has been ignored, has been largely downplayed or ignored, right? And the key problem with that is that net zero, even if we achieve net zero, which is highly unlikely that it's going to be reached by mid-century, but even if it's achieved, it will not stop temperatures from rising due to committed warming from high concentrations of greenhouse gases, elevated ocean temperatures, and of course the removal as we get rid of burning coal and so on, the removal of aerosols will raise temperatures as well. So most models, reports really underestimate the environmental, economic, and social costs of overshooting safe global temperatures. And for example, once we get around 2 degrees or above, we start getting heat waves and so on, and we start getting impacts on crop production that start making a good part of the tropics unlivable. So there's these enormous costs, that are involved that are really not being incorporated in the risk assessments. Also, models tend to minimize the risks of high temperature scenarios, and although they're the most dangerous, and they're increasingly likely. And a big issue that has to be looked at, of course, is the concept of increasingly acidified oceans. So this means that we cannot just look at, for example, bringing in albedo modification, because that won't deal with the problem of carbon dioxide, creating carbonic acid in the oceans and killing off a good part of many of the species in the ocean, right? So we have to, all these issues have to be examined and taken into account. And anyway, this false accounting, what we have is we have a system based on false accounting, and it results in incorrect risk assessments and incorrect understanding of timelines that what has to, the urgency of the situation. The problem, and of course, the problem is that right now we only have one plan, the Paris Agreement, which I call it, which can be referred to as Plan A. We don't have any Plan B. So everything right now is really relying on voluntary emission reductions. And as you know, there's people make promises, and a lot of countries make promises and they don't carry them through, or another government comes in and it doesn't carry it through. But consistently, all the targets and all the promises, including, for example, payments to developing countries and so on, these are underfunded, and the timelines are pushed back, and we miss all the targets. And far from actually reducing emissions are still continuing to grow. So the problem, another problem here is that although most experts and policymakers understand that climate targets are going to be missed, there is an assumption out there that this is not going to be catastrophic, that although there will be severe costs involved with rising temperatures, and it'll be possible to adapt to them, and it'll then be possible eventually to reduce temperatures back down to safe levels. Safe being, of course, 2 degrees, being understood to be 2 degrees. And it is, these are all false assumptions, seriously false assumptions. And the environmentalists and others talk about the moral hazards of climate interventions, of large-scale climate interventions, but in the process ignoring the moral hazards of the greater moral hazards of not intervening, which is of allowing the catastrophic mass extinction of species and the catastrophic consequences of rising temperatures and possibly runaway climate change. So what we have here is a choice yes, there are risks and definitely moral hazards of introducing SRM and other forms of geoengineering. And for sure, the fossil fuel companies will try to use this as a get out of jail for free card. But nevertheless, the moral hazard of not acting is existential. And so they're not equivalent moral hazards. So we urgently need research to determine what is required, not only to prevent dangerous temperature increases, but to ensure a safe, stable climate, which means reducing the energy imbalance. back down to levels when we had a stable climate, which means going back to 350 or below parts per million. So there's now an urgent need to determine what mitigation measures will be required to prevent dangerous overshoot and ensure a safe, stable climate. In other words, we need a new strategy. We really need to question the Paris Agreement strategy, right? And it's not about throwing out the Paris Agreement. It's about adding a new mitigation methods that will deal with the that will deal with the fact that that will effectively reduce temperatures to safe levels until we're able to draw down the greenhouse gases and stabilize the climate. And this means that we have to investigate all plausible options, including all potential geoengineering methods. And what is needed, of course, is a comparative understanding of risk, evaluation of risk here. The risk of overshoot versus the risks of using various climate mitigation methods. And when we only look at the risks of mitigation methods, and we don't look at them vis-a-vis the risks of not intervening, then of course we wind up with the kind of false equivalency that we're seeing a lot of environmentalists do, which is that we better stay away from climate interventions because they have risks associated, and of course they have risks, but those risks have to be measured in relationship to the benefits, costs, and risks of alternative strategies, including doing nothing. So, in summary, we're still decades away from ending greenhouse gas emissions. International climate targets will be missed, and dangerous climate overshoot is inevitable. In fact, we're already in dangerous climate change overshoot. So to prevent catastrophic outcomes, we need to challenge the assumptions that are blocking effective action. And this is my starting point. And so we need to develop a consensus among scientists that first of all among scientists, but then among policymakers, environmentalists, and all stakeholders, that all overshoot mitigation risks and options have to be researched to develop a credible strategy. And a realistic overshoot risk management plan then will need to combine three approaches: continuing to reduce or accelerating the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, deploying large-scale carbon dioxide removal to draw down our atmospheric carbon, and also using solar radiation management technologies to keep temperatures within safe limits until greenhouse gas concentrations have been reduced to levels that allow for a stable climate. So I'm not going to go into this, but this is to me a potential algorithm for how we would look at how we would develop this a strategy. So anyway, that's I'm sorry that I've got a bit of the flu right now, so I'm not in my best form, but it was that would be a summary of how I see it.
Please unmute Suzanne. Suzanne, if you're speaking, please.
Thank you. Trying to guard you all from my dog. Thank you so much, Graeme. And as I said at the beginning, we have submitted some questions that were received in advance to Graeme because he kindly provided us with his presentation. So I have that up, and actually, do I have share capability? I'm going to share it at the appropriate time and see if we have some pre-questions that are already answered. But let's start. I'm going to start from left to right on my view. And so I've got Phil Bogdanoff. Would you like to start?
Thank you.
Phil? Thank you.
Yes. So, Graeme, especially like how you laid out the fact that the strategy of focusing on emissions has been relatively ineffectual and is not going to get us to where we need to go. I like your statement that lots of scientists are operating on false assumptions, and I'd like to add additional challenge to that. I'm putting a link to a paper that sort of outlines the history of how we came to focus on greenhouse gases, and then invite you to read that at your leisure. There's additional cutting edge work that's going on now amongst a number of scientists, and I'm going to start with the phrase that correlation is not causation, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. It turns out that the rise in the concentration of greenhouse gases correlates to actually the destruction of ecosystems around the world. And starting with this paper I just posted and others that are looking at calculating the wattage that results from the heating of ground versus what had been there, the evapotranspiration that actually carries the heat past the greenhouse gases, where when it condenses at the cloud layer, about half of it is shed to space. So folks are working on this. Preliminary calculations indicate that the rise in temperature from the increase in heat kept in by greenhouse gases is only at best, at worst, equivalent to the rise in heat caused by the loss of the green stuff, and actually the loss of green stuff may be several multiples of the heating that's caused by greenhouse gases. So the restoration of bare and degraded land around the world may be a much more effective strategy for actually cooling the planet by shedding the heat to space.
Super. Is there a question in there, Phil?
There was a continuation of our questioning of the assumptions that we're working under.
If I can make a comment here,
Sure.
Phil, I agree completely with you on about this, and this is why one of the most promising developments right now is the development of precision fermentation, the development of artificial meats, and which are being backed by many people, including Bill Gates and so on. And when the price drops and they become much more actually healthier and more as tasty as existing animal products, both artificial milk and artificial meats and fish, then I think we're going to see a rapid reduction in the consumption of animal products, which will allow actually for the rewilding of up to a third of the planet. So that's one of the more positive developments, but of course it needs to be supported and it needs to be put on the agenda. And again, you've got a very powerful meat lobby out there that is going to already starting to, I see they just got a petition, 1,000 scientists to sign up and say that animal meats are essential for human health. So to start trying to block, in Italy, they're trying to block the introduction of artificial meats and so on. So anyway, in any case, I agree with you entirely. And this rewilding, reforestation, the regeneration of the land is absolutely essential in the long run for the restoring a healthy environment.
Super. Robert Tulip.
Thank you. Now, Robert Chris did have his hand up for me, so I'm happy to defer to Robert if that's all right, Suzanne.
Thanks. I'm just going left to right on my screen, so you all popped up pretty close. So between you and Robert.
No, and you go for it, Robert. I'll wait. You might cover my question.
Graeme, I thought your presentation was brilliant. It really summarised many of the things that a number of us have been arguing recently, and it highlights just the disconnect between dominant assumptions and reality, and it's like we're in a situation where a paradigm shift is required, and we all know the great difficulty of convincing the Pope to look through the telescope when he doesn't want to, in Galileo's instance, and so getting an understanding of the scale of that paradigm shift is essential. One example that came up in our conversation was the meaning of mitigation, where the IPCC defines mitigation as greenhouse gas emission reduction, but that only mitigates the amount of the speed at which we worsen the problem. It doesn't actually mitigate climate change, and so there's this conceptual error. What I would like to advocate is an international climate organisation that's focused directly on albedo enhancement as an immediate security risk. And the way I see the situation is that in terms of the immediate political focus, I would like to see a complete inversion of the climate priorities. Like, really, we should be putting 90% of our effort into solar radiation management and about 9% into carbon dioxide removal and 1% into emission reduction, just in terms of the prevention of tipping points. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on those points. Thank you, Graeme.
I think there's a question about what kind of organization should be in charge of looking at developing a new strategy and looking at the question of being in charge of the research on all mitigation options. And it's questionable the IPCC should be in charge of it, because they have, Saudi Arabia can get in there and veto things. So I don't know if I think your idea for developing a new organization would be good. The question is how to do that. Otherwise, maybe you have to go through the Royal Society, AGU, existing societies. I think Peter would be in a much better position to, Peter Waddington would be in a much better position to comment on this than me. But anyway, I said, can you repeat the last part of what you said there? My flu's kicking in here.
I was saying that we need to invert the priorities,
yes,
and give the main priority to solar radiation management in terms of just stopping tipping points.
I think for me, it's not a question of inverting the priorities. It's a question of making them equal, of bringing them up. I think the problem with emissions, I think we have to continue pushing for emissions reductions, because the increasing, the carbon dioxide is going to kill off the oceans. So we have to stop. We have to figure out how we can stop emissions and draw down carbon dioxide as rapidly as possible. But at the same time, without solar radiation management, without dropping temperatures right away, we are going to continue to pass tipping points, and we're going to have catastrophic climate change. So it definitely has to be brought to the forefront of the discussions right now. It has to become put on the. I think we have to raise it as a primary discussion point in international discussions on climate change, for sure. It has to be brought to the top of the agenda, but not to be exclusive. That would be my argument.
Thank you.
Super. Robert, Chris.
Yeah, Graeme, that was inspirational. I think I wish I had written it. I could have written it, because what you've presented there is, I think you've stolen it from my PhD thesis. But in any event, I'm really thirsty for more. You set out a kind of a status report of where we're at, and what the issues are. And you preface this by reference to complex living systems and the processes of change within those. And I want to just take a step back here and talk about, and ask you about the principles at stake here. I want to move away from the detail about whether it's SRM or this institution or that bit of technology, and just let's talk about the process of change, because we know that a lot of things have got to happen. You've listed a lot of things that need to happen. You've talked about the power dynamics, you've talked about the meat lobby, you've talked about the oil and gas lobby, amongst others, and there are several others. What I'm really interested in from you, Graeme, is some contribution that addresses the mechanisms whereby these changes can come about within the context of a complex adaptive living systems. Because my understanding of these systems, I'm going to keep this really short, I mean really short, is that they go through typically a 4-phase adaptive cycle. They start off in reorganization, they then grow, they then conserve what they've got, and then they collapse. And then from the collapse, something new emerges. And my perception is that we are now very much, we being humanity and the other complex systems of which it is part, we are on the cusp between the conservation and collapse stage. We may actually have passed it already, one would only know retrospectively. So what really interests me, Graeme, is your view about how we make all these things come to pass. What do we have to do to get those in power, whether they are politically powerful or economically powerful, to register the points that you have been making in order to make the changes on the ground at the speed and the scale that is necessary to avert the triggering of the tipping events that you mentioned?
Okay, well, first of all, as regards to stealing your thesis, stealing other people's ideas is called scholarship. But
absolutely.
Stealing one person's ideas, plagiarism. Stealing many people's ideas is scholarship, yeah, of course. But
I ingest, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, the general process, on our website, we talk about the general process of collapse and transformation, how societies change, and how the old ideas reach the old worldview reaches a point where it's dysfunctional, and people start losing faith in it, and things start falling apart. The limits of the old system are reached, and things start falling apart, and then people start questioning it, right? And at that point, there's two roads. Either the resources are freed up because people start pulling away from the old system and they are no longer devoting all their energies to maintaining the old system, then they can be reorganized into the creation of, moving to a new level, a new adaptive level, right? The creation of a new system state. And that's the process that we're right now as a society. There's two processes going on. The dominant trend is collapse of the old system because we're following the industrial paradigm, which has reached its environmental, economic and social limits. And we're also seeing the emergence of new systems-based theories and ideas, integral worldview, which is allowing we're starting to see new emerging properties like systems self-awareness, with feedback processes through the internet and so on like that allow for new decentralized forms of production, etc. But in any case, so we're now at a point where we can go two ways. We can either shift towards a new sustainable system, or we're going to see the collapse, systemic collapse, global collapse, which will take place. And what's taking place as we will see with climate change, is that there's a lot of systemic inertia, which is cultural inertia, the inertia of the old paradigm, the built environment, the infrastructure is all geared towards it's all fossil fuels. And this doesn't disappear overnight. People can't shift overnight. They will starve if they try shifting overnight, right? So this is part of the whole illusion that we are going to somehow or other be able to get rid of all emissions, and we're going to go to net zero that quickly, because quite likely it's going to be very difficult to get the entire planet to make that shift. On one hand, we've got, I think, new technologies are emerging much faster than most people understand. I mean, things like AI and so on like that, but also, better solar cells and new energy forms. Like some of the people in this group are proposing new ways of harvesting energy and so on like that. And I think that we're going to see in the next few decades, we're going to see enormous breakthroughs in the emergence of entirely new, I mean, maybe we'll see fusion energy. I don't know, but I'm sure we're going to see all kinds of new technologies emerge that will that will help us make a transition, make a rapid transition. At the same time, the resistance of existing existing structures and interest groups is going to be enormous. I mean, look at Russia. I mean, Putin has zero interest in climate change, right? He has his interest, and the interest of the Iranian dictatorship and many other countries, is their only interest is how do we sell every last barrel of oil and gas, that we have, right? And they're going to block and resist to the very end. And this is going to be a very, very uneven process, the process of change, right? And so the issue here is creating a critical mass of scientists and activists and politicians, progressives who understand, and the general public, particularly young people, who have an vested interest in the future, not in the past. And we have to create a critical mass that starts creating, what's called cultural creatives and so on, that are starting to create tipping points. And we have to look for the leverage points within the system where you can you can get through to people. I mentioned here that an article the article that said that 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change, that global warming is caused by human activities and so on like that, right? And that turned out to be quite a seminal article, in the sense that it really influenced a lot of policymakers and a lot of journalists and the general public, partly because it got picked up by the U.S. by the president's office, right? And publicized and given credibility that way. So part of the issue is to get the ideas, get credible scientists, to get through to celebrities and politicians and people who are seen by the public and by other groups, by journal, by the media, etc., as being credible, and to get them to start advocating for a new climate change strategy that involves geoengineering. So I think that's, in that way, you then start creating tipping points, and you start changing the popular awareness, and start shifting the dial. Does that help answer? Yeah.
Well, it is an answer. I mean, my concern with what you've said, I mean, it's all very sensible, it's all very logical and very sane. My concern with all of these things is finding a pathway whereby that can happen at sufficient scale and speed to make the difference. Because it's an impossible question to ask or to answer, because of course we talk about these tipping events out there, but we don't know exactly when. We don't know exactly how much time we've got. And it's and this uncertainty itself is a source of inertia in the system, because it's not there yet, so we've got time, because we don't know how much time. And and my concern is that if the people in power, and I'll use that term widely, if the people in power genuinely thought that global warming was an emergency, an existential emergency, they would not be behaving the way they are. And the fact that they're behaving the way they are demonstrates, is proof, in fact, that they do not see the climate crisis as a clear and present danger. And so long as that's the case, it seems to me difficult to see how the balance can shift sufficiently for the things that you've just referred to actually come to pass. And
So
that's my concern.
Let me interrupt for a second and just say that I put in the chat a Google Drive reference to the responses that Graeme has prepared for us in response to the pre-questions that he received, which goes into some of the issues about, what is it that we need to say and who do we need to say it to convince them that what Robert is asking them to believe, which they don't seem to believe, is true. So take a look at that while we're chatting, and let me turn it to Herb for the next question.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks, Graeme. I want to first thank you in particular, Graeme, because many of the people here may not know that you participated with us, what was it, a year ago or so, in helping to develop our letter to the UN and to COP and so forth. And I will speak for myself, the paper you wrote that we have on our website had great influence on me, so that a lot of what we articulate and espouse is a direct or an indirect result of your thinking. And I want to commend and thank you for that. And it's nice to meet you today. And I hope you get over your flu soon.
I'm glad it was useful.
So that now that I've said that, when I saw that Robert Chris was speaking before me, I figured that he would probably ask the question that I was going to ask, which he more or less did. So let me just, but he asks it much more eloquently than I can. So let me just shift my question a little bit to a very practical day-to-day question that HPAC, the A is for action. We're not a scientific debating society, though we've had some of the most eminent climate scientists in the world speak with us and that are members of our group. But our focus is on getting from here to there. And we're a volunteer group. Our treasury that Ron skillfully takes care of is not in multi figures, if you will. It's just in a few hundred hours. And we're always debating and discussing our steering circle. How can we maximize our influence and impact in this quest that you've so clearly and accurately described today? So that's my question to you. If you came on our steering circle and we put you on the spot, what kind of suggestions would you have for us, knowing us at least to some degree, what we do, and certainly knowing what we espouse, because it is substantially the same as you do in terms of getting from here to there?
Well, first of all, I think that when we talk about the powers that be and so on like that, it's not monolithic. So we're not dealing with you've got many different actors out there. I mean, it's a huge planet with 8 billion people, and you've got many different governments, many different factions within governments. You've got within the billionaires and so on, you have people who are very keen to work on climate change issues and people who are very keen to oppose it. So I think that part of the challenge is to identify those leverage points, the people that are going to be responsive and are going to be supportive within the scientific community, within policymakers, within the private sector, et cetera, within international organizations, in environmental groups, et cetera. And first of all, reach out to them and provide them with information and with materials that they can use then to help change opinion within their group and build coalitions, right? So it's about reaching out to all stakeholders and finding those that are sympathetic. For me, it seems to me that as a group of scientists, the starting point is to use our own particular expertise, networks, et cetera, and start with that as to create critical mass there.
Okay, well, I hope you'll continue participating with us because we've attempted some of those things and others, and we need people like yourself to work with us to maximize and multiply our impact. If I could very quickly, I want to just make one or two quick follow-up comments, and then I'll turn it back to you, Suzanne. When you talked about sort of cultured meat, in the book I recently wrote, I came across the fact that in Britain there was an effort by a major supermarket chain to sell cultured meat, and they found that it was extremely popular and well received, but they also found that it didn't result in any reduction in the sales of meat, which reminded me that it's not unlike the renewables that increase all the time, but not at the expense of a reduction in the use of fossil fuels. So, I mean, it's that kind of dilemma of human behavior and sort of sunk systems that continue. That's a real challenge. So with that, I'll turn it back to Suzanne.
Thank you. And Rod has a question.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Graeme, very much. And again, it's good to see you and hear you talking after our those letters that we actually cribbed. I think a lot of your your early writing for those early letters, and people should know that. I wanted to. Well, I think most of us agree completely with what you're saying. I mean, in a broad sense, we're all on the same page. And although you stated in more concise and eloquent terms, and that's always good to get the message out there. It's a big part of this is communicating and getting people to understand the stakes here. I did want to just make a few points. One, a broader view of cooling, I think, is one thing that we have said. We have, at least in HPAC, we use the term direct climate cooling to include things like ocean thermal energy conversion, because it turns out the heat from the ocean, as you pointed out, is one of the things that's going to keep the temperature up. Even if we get to net zero, it'll keep the temperature at a plateau for a long time. And some of these also have multiple co-benefits alongside that. And so, it's good to have a very broad range. And rather than, I get that, solar radiation management and albedo enhancement, so forth, that does cover a very important class of methods, and probably the primary methods to get things done quickly. But it's not the whole portfolio. There are 18 of them in our paper, by the way. The other thing is possible off-ramp. So I think I agree with you that it's going to be very, very hard. It's not just cultural; it's material, it's economic, right? It's just the vested economic interest. And my evolutionary social evolution takes a lot from Marx. Who I think was very, very prescient about all this and very insightful. And it's just the vested interests don't give up their privilege in there easily. And so yes, I mean, I think it could take decades, centuries, whatever, to make that transition to what I call industrial farmer cultivator system, sustainable system. But in the meantime, and I agree again, we have to find some kind of key players, leverage, and I don't know if it's going to be necessarily democratic. I mean, I don't know. The great powers, a group of great powers, if they could just get together and say, look, we gotta do something quick and cool the planet. We can't. The problem is social evolution is so much longer, and democratic social evolution and consensus, arriving at those things. Even without all the other problems of vested interests and forces working in the opposite direction, it makes it very, very difficult and a very hard, as we can see with the IPCC as a good example, to move things particularly in ways that will harm those vested interests. So it probably will take something. I think it may very well take something like that to get the cooling that we need to give us time for social evolution, for us to do the good work, to do the organizational work and the building work and the cultural work and all the rest of it. For that, and I just would propose two possible off ramps. I don't know what you think of those. That's where I think it's good to. I hope you have more of a chance to participate in many of our lectures and goings on, because it's a really good way to share ideas and information. I know in Australia it's hard because the time differences, but you've got our comrades like people like we have many Australian people, but it is hard. It is hard. But we have recordings. But anyway, there's off ramps like producing hydrogen from the ocean with OTEC, and then using the embedded fossil fuel infrastructure, including the pipes and so forth, to use that, a chemical carrier or even a synthetic hydrocarbon carrier, zero energy. But and then there's the possible way of retrofitting natural gas burning power plants. This is a global thermostat method to turn them into negative emissions technologies, which again is, I get it, natural gas not going to solve this problem using fossil fuel gas or fossil gas, as Brian has often corrected me, I'm reading Greta's book like now and then, but it's not a solution, but as an off ramp. You say the fossil fuel people, and I think perhaps Robert Tulip would agree with this, that if you be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Here's a way you can still the natural gas, we can use that for negative emission, which is better than zero emission, and generate electricity where we already have the pipes and those sources. There are some ways to square the circle so that the vested interests, because we have to somehow get them to start working to help instead of obstruct things constantly. So it goes against my Marxist inclinations, but I think in the realistic, pragmatic world that we live in, we have to move quickly, and the quicker the faster, and so that's the end of my spiel, and that's my question. What do you think of that?
Well, I think the fossil fuel companies will figure out their own off ramps. They're already looking at it. So I think that they're already looking at where they're going to get what's going to be the cheapest sources of green fuels. So that if you put pressure on the airline companies and say you've got to reduce, your greenhouse gas emissions by 5% per year, they will come up with solutions, right? If you put in, the starting point. So I'm less concerned. I think that I'm less concerned with, or I don't think that the proper place for us to put our energies at this time is into trying to find solutions with the fossil fuel companies. We need to put our solutions into creating more pressure on them and making it very, very clear that the public will not stand for is not willing to put up with catastrophic outcomes, that people understand this to be national security risks, they understand this to be existential. This is about the future of our children and the future of the planet. And when they, and as you do things like if you put in proper pollution taxes, as you remove fossil fuel subsidies, as you start creating you start creating cheaper alternatives to fossil fuels, as then the shifts, they will see the writing on the wall, and they will start shifting, they will start adapting and shifting, right? So, by the way, I wanted to mention that you've got people have to understand that this is a massive long-term problem. You've got the environmentalists saying, well, what about termination shock? If you bring in solar radiation, you may have to maintain it for centuries. And the reality is, yes, you probably will have to maintain it for centuries, because it's going to take centuries to millennia before the planet re-equilibrates at a stable level, right? So there's you've got 25 billion Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs worth of energy in the oceans now, extra energy in the oceans. It's going to be an enormous process before there's, the sea levels are not going to stabilize in 20 years. It's just not going to happen, right? And so the reality is, yes, we are going to have to bring in geoengineering, and we are going to have to maintain it on a massive scale for a very long time. And this question about termination shock is a false equation. It's just the same as if you have diabetics, you've got somebody with stage 2 diabetes, and they have to have insulation. And you say, oh my God, if they stop, they're going to have termination shock. Well, yes, they are. But if they don't take insulation in the first place, they're going to have termination shock. So what we've got right now is the same as with the moral hazard argument. It's the wrong argument. We have to frame it in the correct way so people can understand. And then if people understand the urgency of the situation, we will stop giving these loopholes to the fossil fuel companies that they're getting right now, which allows them to continue increasing emissions rather than actually getting out, instead of being forced to actually get out of the business altogether.
So if I could just, so yes, I absolutely agree. We need a mandatory system of global regime and pressure. Obviously, I think I absolutely agree. The problem I'm dealing is I'm coming from the left, and many people, young people, we need a revolution. We need a revolution. So you got to somehow, if we wait for the revolution, we'll never solve this problem, or at least it will be maybe 100 years. It'll be a very long time. So this is where I'm sort of, I agree with you though. It has to be mandatory, and yes, they will find their own exit ramps. Thank you.
The first strategic need of revolution, it has to work.
What's that?
The challenge with the revolution is making one that actually works.
Well, yeah, and it takes a long time, especially a democratic revolution.
I'm coming from a lifetime of radicalism too, right? But the problem is being the wrong design, and with people trying to make change. And so it has to be, you have to have a viable strategy. And the challenge here is to develop a viable strategy that works on all levels, that is scientifically valid, that is socially valid, that is economically valid, is environmentally valid. And so that's the challenge, is developing the correct design. And I think that's what we have to do right now, is really understand what is a viable strategy for preventing dangerous climate change. And that's one that, and make it clear to people that this will work. We have to go this route. We have to change. And then if people can see that, then I think, and if it can't be easily challenged or dismissed, then I think maybe it'll have some power.
Yeah, and prevent a fascist revolution instead of the kind we want.
Yes, I mean
that's one of my concerns.
Yeah, you're seeing the rise of fascism. You're seeing fascism in Russia right now. In China.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Brian.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. And Graeme, it's great to see you, and greetings from Southeast Queensland. Encouraged by all the discussion here. And I think the question of social acceptance is going to be really essential, and I want to touch on that. But I also want to touch on the fact that I think, we've got to bring most of the constituents on this planet along with us in this journey at Spaceship Planet Earth, and we don't get out of here alive. So we need to actually probably work with groups. We've had some conversations with groups like Shell, in the oil majors. They've been part of the problem and historically, but they're also the only oil major to make a Scope 3 decarbonization commitment of 45% by 2035 and 100% by 2050. Now, to the extent that we can hold them to it, this is a crack in the wall, if you will, because we actually have some thoughts with marine permaculture and more, where we believe that after we've addressed food security and ecosystem regeneration, we can actually begin to look at providing the biomass that will be needed for hydrothermal liquefaction and pathways to provide bio-crude that's carbon negative and climate positive, and actually could reuse 2/3 of the infrastructure that's present in the oil and gas majors today. And that is the super tankers, the refineries, the distribution networks, and even getting it out to the airliners. It's a hope. We've got to do an order of magnitude cost reduction and performance improvement, but that's what we're working here in Queensland and across Southeast Asia to actually transform humanity's relationship with the ocean from one of extraction to one of regeneration. Now, I think we're in agreement on what to do. To quote Cambridge, reduce, remove, and repair. Reduce emissions, remove emissions that we've done historically, and repair the climate. Let's talk about the framing, which relates so closely to what you've mentioned, and that is the social acceptance. Now, we don't call it geoengineering when we drive our cars or fly our airplanes or emit fossil fuels, and yet we all know that's what we're doing. We've been geoengineering for the past 2 centuries to the tune of 2,300 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So I'm wondering, why should we call it geoengineering when we're working to get back to a healthy climate? And I would ask rhetorically, why call it solar radiation management, and who likes radiation, when we have the opportunity to reframe the entire conversation? So I'd like to propose a reframing, and I'll just throw one out there as a straw man, and that is, why not call it working to re-brighten the planet physically, morally, and intellectually? Because after all, isn't SRM really about re-brightening in so many ways?
I think reframing and coming up with terms that are like regenerating, terms that are positive and are appropriate and are motivating. That's really important, right? And I think we should look at all of them. Rebrightening is something to look at, although I don't know if albedo modification is actually rebrightening, but maybe it is. I don't know, but maybe it is, because we're trying to keep the Arctic ice and so on like that, and definitely keeping restoring the ice is rebrightening. So yeah, maybe anyway, I'm totally open to all suggestions. I think that's important. By the way, I'm in Brisbane, so I'm just around the corner from you. Yeah, we should get together.
Yeah, I would love to get together. I think that would be excellent. And just to provide a brief cap on this, the Professor Tapio Schneider at Caltech and others have validated that, sadly, a warmer world is a less cloudy world. And so when it comes to marine cloud brightening, when it comes to literally regenerating the clouds that exist on this planet pre-industrially and are so essential to reflecting radiation back into space, it is a rebrightening from the tropics to the Arctic. We're big fans of Leslie Field refreezing the Arctic. We're big, and Peter Wadham's work and others. And whether, I would just say, from the Arctic to the equator, we've got a chance to rebrighten the planet. And at least in 2 or 3 contexts, it seems to be scientifically valid. Thank you. Great to see you.
I wanted to again refer to the document and responses to questions that Graeme had prepared for us, some of the questions were submitted by Mike McCracken. And I think in that document, as we've been discussing in the steering circle, is having a framework and a strategy that we can collectively move forward to try and get people's attention. He's laid out a lot of responses and recommendations that I think help create a foundational document that we can build a strategy from. Robert, Chris, you still have your hand up. Did you have a follow-up question?
I did actually. I just wanted a couple of observations really. I'm how can I put this? The issue here for me, that I constantly keep coming up against, is the process of change and drawing all these threads together. And you made a comment, Graeme, for example, about the strategy and having to get it right at all levels. And you listed a number of areas where work needed to be done. But the way you did it, perhaps unintentionally, I don't know, suggested we lived in a kind of homogeneous world where where everybody has the same value system and has the same objectives, so that, you know, somehow we would get together and through some rational process, there would emerge an understanding on the basis of which we would then move forward. And I find that really kind of ahistorical, I suppose. It's unlikely. That isn't quite, to me, it isn't how systems work. I imagine it'll be a much more fraught process. And because it's a more fraught process, and because it will be messy, I mean, to me, the process is going to be messy. Quite how it will be messy, I don't know, but it'll be messy. It'll just take a lot of time. And I then worry, and this is the kind of thing that I just can't escape from, particularly talking to a bunch of people, you know, that are on this call regularly, who have genuinely depressed me about how imminent these tipping events are, and how little time we've got, and how the window is closing if it hasn't already closed. I'm thinking to myself, you know, let's just get real here, guys. You know, what realistically can we achieve at this scale in the time that's available? You know, and then some of you will see the things that I've been writing on a thread in the last few days. But, you know, I think, well, you know, maybe we should, you know, playing to Ron's argument here, maybe we should just let's chill, just let it happen. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? A lot of people are going to die. Well, they're all going to die anyway. It'll be a bit messy, you know, but it will get through. Humanity will get through this. The planet will get through it. There's going to be a bright new future out there. It'll be a bit messy en route, but, you know, is that really, in the great scheme of things, you know, are we not setting ourselves up here with on a pinnacle that is perhaps a little arrogant, that we somehow have got the future of the planet in our hands, and that what we do today somehow determines forever? I'm deeply concerned about the values that we are applying here, and maybe so that's kind of the background. But there's one which you might want to comment or not, but there's one very specific question which emerged from the various comments and your comments. So far, most of the work that has been done by governments in and around climate change has been in the form of incentives. There's been very little in the way of regulation. Now, it seems to me, and this is my view, which I'd be very grateful if you could take a position on, that there will be no effective resolution of global warming unless the coercive power of the state is used extensively around the world, and states all pulling in the same direction. So the idea that this can be done through the market, through incentives, through encouragement, and so on and so forth, seems to me absolutely for the birds. And that at some point and in some way, governments have got to step up to the plate and absolutely take control and use their coercive power.
Okay, in reference to the last point, clearly at some point the government has to say you have to drive on one side of the road. You can't drive all over the place, right? Everybody has to drive. Everybody has to stick to their side of the road, and they have to stop at stoplights. And I think we see this happening with. There is a shift in this direction. We're seeing regulations coming in, agreements in the shipping industry and so on like that to reduce the pollution, et cetera, et cetera. They're too slow. They're not fast enough. But you know, we see there is momentum occurring. I wouldn't say everything is negative. Clearly, I agree with you. This isn't a lovey-dovey process. This is a power struggle in the end between different groups with often diametrically opposing interests. I think that we're dealing with fossil fuel, not only fossil fuel interests, but dictatorships, Saudi Arabia, Russia, etc., who will do everything they can to obstruct this process. And when you see the Russian-Ukrainian war, it comes right down to a straight power struggle in which there's the good guys and the bad guys, and it's very, very significant to the world. Very important that the good guys have enough weapons and actually win this war and weaken the power of dictators around the world. And it'll be an absolute disaster if the world gives into nuclear blackmail and Russia is able to win this war and get away with it. It will be a green light to other dictators to make more wars. So no, there are power struggles involved, and it is very important that we try to consolidate build power and support in the sense of mass movements and support of getting the support of powerful interests and political parties and governments in support of effective mitigation measures. And I think that to me, we shouldn't have any illusions about this, that somehow or other, when at the IPCC, when everybody says that they want climate mitigation, you shouldn't believe them. There are governments, and there are actors they're people attending the conference, and their job is to torpedo the discussions. That's what they're set there to do. You're not there to make them work. They're there to make sure they don't work, right? And so, and we should be really clear about that, right? And and again, I think one of the important things about writing this paper, one of the reasons I want to write this paper on the fallacies, is I think it's necessary to actually call it out and say there are not only illusions here, there is obstruction going on. There are people that are trying to stop this, right? And we have to stop pretending that everything's fine and everything's going to go well, everything's going to work out, right? Now, by the way, why should we do this when we're just little bit players in an enormously complex game? Well, I'm quite aware of the fact that I'll probably be dead in the next 10 or 20 years. I'm my dotage at this point, but to me, you do your best. This is the point of it. If you love the world and life and your families and so on, which I do, then this is why there's no better thing to do, right? What else would you do? I'm not going to go bowling, play cards for the rest of my life. So anyway, I think you put up the good fight, but more than that, I think that it's most people in the world are good people. Most people want the world to survive. Most people are not there just for their own greed or their own psychopathic goals. And so I think it's quite conceivable and quite possible that in fact we're going to make a transition to a peaceful, sustainable world. So I'll do what I can. I have no idea whether I'll have any effect or not. But what else is there? That's my view. So.
Well, I suppose if the choice is between that and bowling, you've probably got the right balance.
Well, you can spend your time in the pub, I guess, too. But anyway.
Or you had a follow-up.
Yeah, first I posted in the chat a comment and a paper I came across recently that was co-written by Tim Lenton, who I think most of us know, and others, basically calling for the establishment of integrated catastrophe assessments. I only mentioned that because what startled me was that someone is now calling for that as opposed to 20 years ago. I mean, it just, but I did put a link to the paper, and I encourage everybody it is an important paper. It's just a generation too late. But I wanted to with some hesitation, because I'm not a scientist, as the Republican politicians in the United States would often say when people ask them about climate change, and you're not either, Graeme, a physical scientist, but your argument, and to a large degree, no, not entirely, the HPAC argument relies to some degree on two assertions that you made. One is that there is a whole lot of committed warming in the pipeline, and the second is that tipping points are being activated or will be activated. And we were fortunate enough, and these are on our website, to have people like Zeke Housefather and David Keith just within the last couple of months, who are, whatever else you may agree or disagree, they're, really eminent, experienced, well-published, and highly respected scientists. And they both, in their own way, denied that. I mean, David Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, said, no, he said, I was at Princeton the other day, and, my colleagues at Princeton and I and everybody else, who I speak with in the field, basically don't believe that tipping points are a particular threat. I may be mischaracterizing what he said a little bit, but I don't think so. And Zeke has written about that. He's written a paper about tipping points. He's also written a paper about the, if, this absurd idea of getting, if and when we get, or if we get to zero emissions, that within a decade or two, the temperatures will stabilize because of the combination of the ocean heat flux and so forth. So I guess, again, I guess the question is to you and maybe to others, if we have some time. I mean, to the degree to which those two assertions seem to be pretty strong conventional wisdom at this point, do we need to, and we've talked about this before, but is your view that we need to take these on, or you basically set them in your paper as almost self-evident? So anyway, I just want to throw that out to you and to others.
Well, I think one of the reasons for producing the paper is to try to take on some of the challenges, because if you make a list of, I mean, I'd really like to have Peter's comments on this, but I think that if you put forward a list of 10 fallacies or 5 fallacies, key fallacies or something, whatever, right? And you say, these are key scientific fallacies, and get it published in some serious journal, if it's possible to do that, and get it out there, you will immediately provoke a debate. I would think, I would hope, right? But the idea here is to provoke a debate and to force people to step in, right? And then in that process of the debate, then to start surface it, to go a little deeper into the science behind it, and to start seeing if you can't in fact start getting people to shifting some opinion. Because I think right now, when I look at something like why are some people sitting on the fence on this question? Well, maybe it's safer to say, okay, I'm already advocating one difficult issue on geoengineering. I don't want to be arguing with people over other issues, right? I've already got enough going on. And I mean, I ran into this before when I was working on working on climate change issues, and I had people that were willing to go, they were willing to go so far, but because they had other irons in the fire, they didn't want to wind up getting dragged into more arguments with more people because of their grants, because of whatever, right? So anyway, I just think that it would be useful yeah, we have to take on these issues. Yeah.
And if I could, just following up, David Keith was very open, if not eager, to meet with us again and to engage in a larger conversation that we talked about. Brian might moderate, possibly if we could get Johan Rockstrom, and I know Robert Tulip is working on that, or Tim Lenton, or folks like that, to have that kind of conversation on tipping points and so forth, which I think would be extraordinarily important and exciting. So that's something, if any of you can help guide us or advise us on finding, who else might be able to present with a high level of credibility the opposing view to David Keith's, that would be helpful.
Is it possible, is Peter there? Is it possible to get Peter's input on this?
Peter's here. Peter, we need you to come off mute, Peter. There you go.
Yeah, well, I agree with what's been said, and especially this question of putting forward some definite points of view about what's holding up treatment of this system. The fallacies that are holding it, that are obstructing progress, and what we should be doing about it, and not just sort of sitting there. So I'd be happy to write a little something in the next few days and on that topic, and send it to everybody and see what you think.
That would be wonderful, Peter. Thank you. So we are close to the end of our time, and Brian, I'm going to give you the last word.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Just following up on some of the tipping point questions and to give a bit of a preview, I would respond to David, tell that to residents of the Marshall Island whose entire nation is going on underwater, and the Maldives, by the way. Tell it to the species going extinct. Johan Rockström of the Potsdam Institute has documented at the World Economic Forum, not only talking about tipping points, but he's documenting the coupled tipping points. This is not a time to pretend that it's not, these nonlinearities and these irreversible phenomena are not happening on the planet. In fact, it's been 30 years since Rio in 1992, and Section 15 said, do not let scientific uncertainty be a cause for inaction. And yet, we've had 30 years of prevarication and delay, which, to paraphrase James Hansen, comprises failure. Failure to act is a failure. And the future is here today. We like to say it's just not broadly distributed yet. So our audacious goal is 12 years to a gigaton. We hope we can do that on land and in the sea, and heed the admonitions of Paul Revere some 200 years ago. It's going to take all of our actions to build not only climate stabilization wedges, but climate removal wedges, and the political will to eliminate our emissions, to remove most of the 2,300 gigatons that we put into the atmosphere, and to repair the climate along the way, hopefully rebrightening from the equator to the Arctic and enabling us to get back to a healthy climate in our lifetime.
Thank you. So we have covered a lot of ground, but I think also opened a whole new territory of questions, and some that we didn't quite get to, but are probably going to be lengthy. Offline, some of us have been having a conversation on climate vocabulary. Brian's made some recommendations, and there's been some back and forth on, is mitigation the proper way to refer to removing greenhouse gases by reduction versus actual removal. So I think we've laid the groundwork for another panel and discussion on these topics going forward. If there are no further last words or questions, then I'm ready for us to sign off, all except for the steering circle. Anyone got a burning issue they want to raise before? Graeme, please, before I thank Graeme for spending all of his time and struggling through his flu symptoms to present to us. Graeme.
I just wanted to say that Peter and I will be writing an article on this. And so could everybody who has, please send their suggestions, and as well as useful links to reference material and other comments, articles, quotes, whatever, send it to us, and so that we can use it, incorporate it in the materials. Thanks.
Super. And I've put Graeme's email into the chat. He is Graeme@bestfuture.org. Pretty straightforward. And you can also find that information on our website. So Graeme, thank you for taking this time and all the work that you've put into the presentation and the response to questions that we submitted in advance. And we look forward to talking with you again soon.